Chapter 1, 6 Realms of Rebirth. A damp, soft sensation reached his fingertips, accompanied by the strong smell of earth. Kyle Lincoln slowly opened his eyes. The sight before him left him speechless. He was lying in a dirt pit, the ground beneath him loose and soft. Above the pit, trees were densely packed, and a figure stood there. Buried alive. The thought flashed through Kyle Lincoln's mind. He quickly sat up and scrambled out of the pit. Unexpectedly, the figure standing too close to the edge slipped and fell straight down. The sudden turn of events caught Kyle Lincoln off guard. Just as he climbed up, he was forcefully pressed back down. Poor Kyle Lincoln, before he could even think about retaliating, became a cushion for the other person. His head was shoved into the dirt, and the suffocating sensation instinctively made him grab onto the figure. The touch was silky smooth yet firm, like holding onto jelly. The sensation was so perfect that he couldn't help but squeeze twice before reluctantly letting go. What perfect legs! Wait! The figure's legs were on his stomach, so the thing pressed against his face, wasn't it her chest? Only now did Kyle Lincoln notice the sensation on his face. It was distinctly different from elsewhere, unusually soft and exuding a captivating fragrance. It wasn't the scent of any expensive perfume but the natural aroma of a young woman. Ouch, that hurts. A groan escaped as the young woman struggled to get off Kyle Lincoln. Suddenly, as if realizing something, she retreated in fear, stopping only at the edge of the pit. Her trembling finger pointed at Kyle Lincoln. You're dead. Am I dead? But I was definitely poisoned, Kyle Lincoln muttered, startled. He quickly examined himself and was immediately alarmed. The poison had already entered his bloodstream. If not treated in time, it would reach his heart, and even a god wouldn't be able to save him. Ignoring the frightened young woman, Kyle Lincoln lifted his shirt, pinched his index and middle fingers together as if they were silver needles, and began pressing on specific acupuncture points: Great Abyss, Celestial Pivot, Returning Essence, 9 points in total. His movements were so swift that in mere moments, it was done, leaving the young woman covering her mouth, almost screaming. Moments later, Kyle Lincoln felt a surge of heat rising from the 9 points, like a stream of hot spring water coursing through him. Gradually, the heat subsided, and he let out a sigh of relief. The 9 acupuncture points underwent a drastic transformation. From each point, a small amount of viscous fluid seeped out, looking incredibly strange. Amazing! The young woman exclaimed in awe, unable to contain herself. What did you just do? The toxins had been expelled, and naturally, his body was fine. It's just acupuncture, but unlike your acupuncture, I use qi as needles, a much more advanced technique. Kyle Lincoln's complexion became rosy, and he nodded slightly, saying, Let's set this matter aside. Answer me one question: did I owe you money or harass you? Why did you bury me alive? Who buried you alive? When I found you, you were already dead. The young girl's face turned bright red as she muttered softly, I was about to report to the police, but then you faked being dead and dragged me down with you. If I hadn't reincarnated into this body, he really would have been dead. Kyle Lincoln thought to himself, memories flooding back like tidal waves. Kyle Lincoln came from the 25th century, an era of cultivators. According to the history he knew, cultivators already existed in the 21st century. By the 25th century, the wave of cultivation had reached its peak, and almost everyone had become the kind of cultivators once only found in novels. As for himself, he was the master of the Order of the Celestial Physicians. With his cultivation at its peak, he had mastered the 9 needles of the sun god technique up to the 5th level. However, to break through further, he needed to find the world's ultimate treasure, the mystic lunar herb. The mystic lunar herb was an extremely rare plant, often unseen for decades or even centuries. Unable to find it, Kyle Lincoln became obsessed with breaking through. Unwilling to accept failure, he forcibly attempted to break through, only to suffer a chi deviation, endure heavenly tribulation, and fall into the 6 realms of rebirth. The last memory he had was of the icy blue nine-layered heavenly lightning. When he woke up, he had become Kyle Lincoln, who had died from poisoning. This man had the same name as him, but his life was not much better. Chapter 2, 9 Needles of the Sun. God of the Order of the Celestial Physicians. The Lincoln family he belonged to was once a prestigious clan. Unfortunately, they were sabotaged by enemies, losing their vast fortune. In an attempt to save the family, he took an arranged marriage contract made before their bankruptcy and married into another wealthy family. However, his body was weak, and on his wedding night, he lasted only 3 seconds. The next day, he earned the nickname Mr. 3 Seconds. Afterward, he sought treatment everywhere but could not cure his premature ejaculation. His wife, frustrated, kicked him out of the house. In utter despair, he joined a secret clinical trial project, earning a small sum by testing experimental drugs. After the trial ended, he fainted while strolling down the street. Presumably, the reason he was buried here was that the person in charge of the clinical project discovered he lived alone and, unwilling to take responsibility, simply buried him here, leaving him to fend for himself. "If you're fine, then I'll be going." Seeing him lost in thought and silent, the young girl didn't want to stay any longer. She spoke and prepared to climb out of the dirt pit. However, the soil was soft and loose. She exerted uneven force, twisted her ankle, and fell backward. "Careful!" With a loud shout, Kyle Lincoln quickly reached out to catch the falling young girl. However, he didn't think about where he should or shouldn't touch, and both his hands slipped under her skirt, landing directly on her firm, round buttocks. Sorry." He quickly used his strength to help the young lady regain her balance. As he withdrew his hand, 2 black handprints were clearly visible on the underwear beneath her skirt. The young lady suddenly turned around, her face slightly flushed, her voice a mix of embarrassment and anger. "Why are you being so indecent? Let me tell you, I live nearby, and if you dare to act recklessly, I'll find someone to deal with you." Kyle Lincoln let out an awkward chuckle, his eyes darting around. He noticed they were in a forest, not far from a main road, and quickly changed the subject. "Where's your house? Let me walk you home." Although the poison in his body had been cleared, he was still dissatisfied with this ordinary human body. He decided to find a quiet place to properly cultivate the 9 needles of the Sun God from the Order of the Celestial Physicians. While practicing, he also needed to search for the mystic lunar herb. Even though the chances were slim, he had to try. The failures of his past life must not be repeated in this one. This young lady was the first person he met upon arriving in this world. The impression she left on him wasn't bad, so he decided to follow her home. "Why are you following me?" The young lady widened her eyes, crossing her arms in front of her chest, which only made her ample bosom appear even more prominent. "This girl is wild. I like it." Kyle Lincoln's heart was pure, but his face bore a mischievous grin. "Of course, I have ulterior motives. After that, I could even open my own shop." The young lady burst out laughing, unable to hold back her amusement as she teased him. "You're so annoying, but why did you try to kill yourself?" "Kill myself? This girl must have found me after those clinical project managers ran off, so she assumed I committed suicide." Kyle Lincoln pondered for a moment, then a wry smile appeared on his face. He didn't reveal the truth but casually made up a story. "I lost my job, my family, and even my girlfriend left me. I was so desperate that I thought I'd just end it all." Kyle Lincoln's performance truly painted the picture of a down-and-out man in the most vivid way possible. "There are people worse off than you. Should they all kill themselves too?" The girl glared at him, like a teacher scolding a naughty student. "Besides, if you die, your girlfriend won't pity you. She'll just look down on you even more." "You're right. I should pick myself up, find a better girlfriend, and make her furious." Kyle Lincoln's face lit up with excitement, then he stared at the girl and said, "Someone like you. TCH, keep dreaming. The girl rolled her eyes before smiling slyly and saying, "You seem pitiful enough. I'll take you in. You can work as a servant at my house for now, and we'll see how it goes later." On the way while chatting, Kyle Lincoln learned some basic information about the girl. Her name was Bianca White. Her parents divorced very early, and she had lived with her father since childhood. Their livelihood depended on running the Forest specialty restaurant, William White. Chapter 3, Becoming a Tragedy. Bianca, where have you been? We have an important guest at the restaurant, you need to help me welcome them. A reproachful voice echoed, followed by a short, stout man in his late 40s stepping out of the restaurant. Seeing Bianca White and Kyle Lincoln covered in dirt, William White immediately grew wary. He pulled Bianca behind him and stared at Kyle, demanding, "Who are you, and why are you with my daughter?" "Father, he's my friend. He wants to work at the restaurant," Bianca quickly explained. "On the way back, I accidentally fell, and he helped me, so he got dirty too." William White's expression immediately shifted. He angrily scolded, "This is ridiculous. This small restaurant barely supports the two of us, and now you bring this trouble here. Sorry, we're not hiring. You should look elsewhere." "Father." Bianca's face flushed with anger. Ever since she could remember, her father had always been incredibly stingy, to the point where it seemed impossible to change. At that moment, a man stepped out of the restaurant. His demeanor was sharp, and he was dressed impeccably. As soon as he saw Bianca, his eyes lit up, and he smiled, saying, "Bianca, I can help your friend find a job. Don't bother Uncle William anymore." "Ethan Green, why are you here?" Bianca immediately frowned, clearly not having a good impression of the man. William White, however, glared at her and advised, "Bianca, how can you talk to Ethan like that? He's the top student at your medical academy, comes from a good family, and you should network. I mean, learn from him more." Seeing her father treat Ethan Green like his own son, Bianca felt suffocated with anger. Other parents would worry about their children falling in love too early, but her father was the opposite, constantly thinking of ways to push her closer to Ethan Green. Kyle Lincoln remained silent, but he could clearly see the situation unfolding before him. "Hey, looking for a job?" Sensing Kyle's gaze, Ethan Green turned to him with an arrogant tone. "Coincidentally, my pharmacy is short on someone to prepare medicinal decoctions. You can try there. Just say I referred you." A menial job? As the leader of the Order of the Celestial Physicians, Kyle Lincoln couldn't even remember all his disciples, let alone recognize the lowest-ranked menial workers in his sect. And now Ethan Green wanted him to take on such a role. This kind of disdain, how could Kyle Lincoln tolerate it? Kyle Lincoln smirked coldly. "My price is very high. Can you afford it?" Ethan Green raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth curling into a sinister smile. He said, "Friend, you should be realistic. Dreaming of grand rewards without real talent will only lead to tragedy." "Who says he doesn't have real talent?" Bianca, recalling Kyle Lincoln's miraculous acupuncture skills, immediately wanted to defend him. Unexpectedly, before Bianca White could finish her sentence, the restaurant was suddenly filled with waves of vomiting sounds, growing louder by the second. Some even collapsed to the ground. "William White, get in here now. These people are suffering from food poisoning," someone cursed loudly, causing William White to turn pale with fear. Forgetting all about Kyle Lincoln, he dashed into the restaurant. Ethan Green, on the other hand, secretly rejoiced, thinking he finally had a chance to shine in front of Bianca White. He smiled and said, "Bianca, don't worry, leave it to me." Watching Ethan Green stride in arrogantly, Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but chuckle. He leaned closer to Bianca White and whispered, "That guy walks unsteadily, his face pale, clearly suffering from kidney deficiency. Don't let his money fool you. Stop talking nonsense. I don't like him at all." Bianca White blushed, playfully punching Kyle Lincoln. Suddenly, she realized, if someone's suffering from food poisoning, it must be my father's responsibility. Can you help him? Initially, Kyle Lincoln had no intention of stepping in. With modern medical advancements, unless the poisoning was severe, a simple stomach pumping at the hospital would suffice. However, seeing Bianca White's earnest expression, Kyle Lincoln changed his mind. If necessary, I'll help. With that, the two of them entered the restaurant. What should have been a pleasant meal had turned into chaos. The tables and floors were littered with people, most vomiting violently. A few diners, in more severe conditions, had rolled their eyes back and fainted. Chapter 4, Treating Illness Through Acupressure. William White was paralyzed with fear, his legs stiff, nearly collapsing to the ground. Ethan Green, who followed closely behind, remained calm and confidently said, "Mr. William, don't worry. Let me handle this." "You brat, what can you do?" an impatient diner shouted angrily. Ethan Green puffed out his chest with pride. "Of course, I'm going to treat them. I'm a top student at the medical academy. If you don't trust me, surely you can trust my student ID, right?" He then pulled out a student ID from the medical academy, which not only confirmed his identity but also displayed numerous awards. "Fine, then treat them." The diner, unable to argue further, reluctantly agreed. Ethan Green approached one of the patients, pulling out a few silver needles. He inserted them into the celestial pivot, sea of chi, and yin tomb acupoints, gently twisting the needles. These acupoints were crucial for treating food poisoning. Minutes passed, but the patient remained unconscious, showing no signs of improvement. "Strange, aren't these the right acupoints for treating food poisoning?" Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Ethan Green began to panic, cold sweat forming on his forehead. "They're suffering from intestinal damp heat, but your needles are targeting cold dampness in the intestines. The treatment doesn't match the symptoms, so of course, it's ineffective," Kyle Lincoln squatted beside the patient and softly remarked. Though his voice was low, it was enough to capture everyone's attention. In an instant, all eyes, except those of the patients lying on the floor, turned to Kyle Lincoln. "You know nothing, can you stop causing trouble already?" Ethan Green said angrily, just about to try another method when Kyle Lincoln directly pulled the needle out. The room suddenly erupted, everyone tensed up, and William White became even more furious, unable to hold back as he shouted, "Ethan, do you even know what you're doing? Step aside, or you'll get dragged into this mess." Ethan Green immediately stepped aside, sneering coldly at Kyle Lincoln. "If anything happens to them, the responsibility will all be yours." Kyle Lincoln paid no attention to them, his fingers moving deftly as he swiftly pressed 3 acupoints, joining valley, celestial pivot, and upper great void, on the abdomen of the poisoned diner. His movements were smooth and precise, without hesitation. Seeing this, Ethan Green sneered even more. "Do you think this is some kind of TV drama? Acupoints? This is ridiculous." The unpoisoned diners began to stir again, and a few hot-tempered ones rolled up their sleeves, ready to drag Kyle Lincoln out. Some even threatened to call the police, and if it weren't for Bianca White's desperate pleas, the authorities might have already been involved. Suddenly, a wet stain appeared beneath one of the nearby diners. Upon closer inspection, it was clear that the person's pants were soaked. William White could no longer stay silent, shouting in alarm, "Why are they all wetting themselves? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Father, stop distracting him." Bianca White pinched William White's waist, worried it might interfere with Kyle Lincoln's acupuncture. Her eyes never left Kyle Lincoln for a moment. "Uncle William, give me a hand and fetch a cold towel," Kyle Lincoln instructed as he stood up and moved to another unconscious diner. The 9 needles of the sun god were incredibly miraculous but required pure yang inner energy as a foundation. After his reincarnation, Kyle Lincoln's mastery of the 9 needles of the sun god had been rendered useless. The pure yang energy in his body was no more than that of an average person. After performing continuous acupuncture, Kyle Lincoln felt his eyelids growing heavy, as though they could close at any moment. The cold towel was necessary to stay alert. If he fainted before saving all the patients, what a disgrace that would be. William White grumbled in dissatisfaction, "I won't join in on this nonsense." "I'll help him," Bianca White retorted, shooting William White a glare. She ran to the kitchen to fetch a towel and went straight to Kyle Lincoln, taking the initiative to wipe his sweat. "Bianca, don't help him. Just look at him, he's completely unreliable. If the patients hold him accountable later, you'll be implicated too." Ethan Green frowned deeply, his expression dark as he watched Kyle Lincoln, as though afraid he might flee. Kyle Lincoln raised his head indifferently and said bluntly, "If I don't treat them, can you cure them?" Ethan Green's facial muscles twitched slightly, and he pointed a finger at Kyle Lincoln, just about to lash out when someone suddenly exclaimed in surprise, "Oh my God, he's actually waking up." The previously unconscious diner sat up in a daze. Seeing the wet patch on his pants, his old face flushed red. Glancing around, he awkwardly asked, "Who splashed water on me?" Chapter 5, The Affectionate Maiden, Saved Your Life, Yet Still So Stubborn. "That's my urine you're drenched in," someone teased, quickly shifting their gaze back to Kyle Lincoln, eager not to miss the unfolding drama. Reflecting carefully and taking in the chaotic scene before him, the diner finally realized what had happened. He sincerely looked at Kyle Lincoln and said, "You saved me. Thank you so much. Thank me later. I still have others to save." At this moment, Kyle's face was drained of color, sweat as large as beads continuously streamed down his face. Bianca White, distressed by his state, wiped his sweat while instinctively supporting his arm, afraid he might collapse at any moment. The affectionate maiden, now completely captivated by Kyle Lincoln's unwavering focus on healing, seemed to have forgotten William White standing behind her, watching. Seeing this, William White was fuming with rage, nearly choking on his own anger. To add fuel to the fire, someone nearby remarked, "William White, your daughter found you an excellent son-in-law. This man is truly a miracle doctor." "Humph, he wishes." William White grumbled, wanting to storm over and separate the two. However, he feared disrupting Kyle Lincoln's treatment, unsure how he'd handle the aftermath if that happened. Meanwhile, Ethan Green stood nearby, his face pale with fury, his eyes glaring daggers at Kyle Lincoln, flames of anger practically erupting from him. After treating the last poisoned diner, Kyle Lincoln was utterly exhausted, his complexion as pale as a sheet of paper. He no longer had the strength to stand. As he attempted to push himself up, his legs gave out, and he fell backward. Instinctively, Bianca White reached out with both arms, catching him directly in her embrace. Soft, comforting, and carrying a pure fragrance that seemed to seep into his very soul. Within a minute, Kyle Lincoln's pale face gained a faint blush. Even he was astonished. Truly a case of nourishing young. At the moment of contact with Bianca White, he felt a dense energy emanating from her fragrant body. Using the 9 needles of the sun god technique, he absorbed it entirely, converting it into a strand of spiritual energy for cultivation. Without this, he wouldn't have recovered his complexion so quickly. Could the energy in Bianca's body have a similar effect to the mystic lunar herb? Quickly, Kyle Lincoln dismissed the thought. In his past life as a master of medical arts, he had never encountered such a phenomenon in any woman. The strange occurrence just now was likely a mere coincidence. "You little rascal, are you planning to stay there forever, taking advantage of her?" William White's grumbling voice broke through. Kyle Lincoln smiled wryly, noticing Bianca White's blushing, makeup-free face. He said, "I'm fine now. Thank you. It's nothing. You can rest a bit longer," Bianca White replied, burying her head even deeper. Was this some kind of subtle hint? Hearing this, Ethan Green clenched his fists tightly, his nails digging into his palms, wishing he could devour Kyle Lincoln alive. Smiling faintly, Kyle Lincoln still stood up, paying no attention to the slight disappointment that flashed through Bianca White's eyes. He looked at William White with a serious expression. Where did you buy this batch of wine from? Which distributor? Wine. Weren't they suffering from food poisoning? William White looked confused, thinking to himself, the wine distributor is young Master Arthur Gold, so there shouldn't be any issues, right? Kyle Lincoln pointed to the diners who were unharmed and still watching the commotion. You can ask them if they drank the wine. Recalling that the saved diners were helped by detoxification through urination, these diners suddenly realized, William White, so you were selling fake wine. Some even rolled up their sleeves, glaring at William White with hostility, seemingly ready to teach him a lesson. My father didn't know it was fake wine. We are responsible, but the distributor is the real culprit. Bianca White bravely stood in front of William White, speaking, though her eyes still showed a hint of fear. However, this courage left Kyle Lincoln impressed. He decided to help William White one more time. Bianca is right. We, like you, are victims as well. Kyle Lincoln retracted his silver needle, smiling at everyone. The miracle doctor is right. We should demand compensation from the distributor. Someone shouted, and the emotions of all the diners were stirred, buzzing with anger and discussion. However, Kyle Lincoln noticed a fleeting trace of fear and hesitation in William White's eyes, something not easily detected. Bianca White didn't notice anything unusual. She only wanted to help her father get through this ordeal quickly and hurriedly said, Father, contact the distributor immediately. They need to take responsibility for this. #### Chapter 6, The uninvited guest. William White hesitated, pulling Bianca White aside and quietly murmured, Bianca, there's no real harm done. Maybe we should just let it go. How can we just let it go? If Kyle Lincoln hadn't been here, our shop would have been shut down by now. Bianca White frowned, her face full of indignation. But nothing really happened in the end, William White defended, lowering his head as if he had something difficult to admit. Kyle Lincoln gestured for Bianca White to remain silent, and she obediently closed her mouth. Uncle William, is it because this distributor has significant influence, and you don't want to get involved with them? Kyle Lincoln asked calmly. Hayes. William White sighed, realizing Kyle Lincoln had hit the mark. He no longer concealed the truth and admitted, this wine came from young Master Arthur Gold. Young Master Arthur Gold. Hearing this name, the diners who had previously been eager to seek compensation immediately shrank back, muttered a few words of thanks, and quickly left. Ethan Green also let out an awkward laugh, but his words were pleasant. Uncle William, the matter has been resolved, so I'll take my leave now. I'll come visit you again when I have free time. All right, go ahead with your work. Thank you for today. William White waved his hand, as if all the patients had been cured by Ethan Green himself. Kyle Lincoln didn't dwell on these matters and thoughtfully said, it seems that the influence of young Master Arthur Gold is truly significant. Just now, those people were so aggressive, but now they've all vanished. Isn't that a good thing? It was quite a troublesome situation, but now they've all left, and I don't have to explain anything. William White breathed a sigh of relief. The thought of having to demand compensation made him nervous. He didn't have the courage for that, but with so many people suffering from alcohol poisoning, he couldn't avoid responsibility. If those people pursued the matter, he'd surely have to pay a large sum, covering the compensation that young Master Arthur Gold should have paid. Unexpectedly, William White seemed resigned to this outcome. Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but laugh and teasingly said, according to what you're saying, we should be thanking young Master Arthur Gold. Isn't that true? The reputation of young Master Arthur Gold really came in handy. The protection fees we paid weren't wasted after all. William White, feeling relieved about saving a large compensation amount, spoke with a mix of gratitude and relief. Still focused on Kyle Lincoln, Bianca White suddenly expressed concern, Father, you even pay protection fees? Are they gangsters? That's outrageous. Shoo, don't talk nonsense. There are no gangsters here. What's that saying again? Taking someone's money to help them avoid trouble, William White realized he had misspoken and quickly clarified. He's clearly one of them. Bianca White pouted, her small face flushing with anger. However, William White had no intention of pursuing young Master Arthur Gold, so she couldn't do anything about it. Enough about that. Clean up the mess in the shop first. William White scolded, pointing at the chaotic scene on the floor. You little brat, if you're not in a hurry, lend a hand too. Father, you didn't even keep him here, so how can you expect him to help clean up? Bianca White complained. I didn't say he'd do it for free. Later, I'll call old Master Alexander Gold and see if this kid can work as a school doctor over there. William White rolled his eyes but softened his tone. Old Master Alexander Gold will surely accept him. He's the professor of Eastern medicine at Mid-Sea Academy of Healing and also my mentor. Bianca White beamed, her cheeks blushing as she spoke. Maybe he'll even recommend him to Mid-Sea Grand Hospital No. 1. I'll work hard to intern there too. Her shy and innocent demeanor was truly endearing, and Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but steal a few more glances. Feeling as though her soul had been seen through, Bianca White quickly turned away. Just as she was about to help clean the shop, a few uninvited guests arrived. Business is booming, huh? Not a single table is empty. 7 or 8 thuggish men with eccentric appearances swaggered in. The one leading them, with striking red-dyed hair, glanced around before sneering, but William White, making money like this, you can't let us brothers suffer. The protection fee this month was too low. Boss Rowan Red, you must have forgotten. I've always paid according to the rules, not a penny short. William White approached Rowan Red submissively, his back nearly bent to the ground. That was last month. Starting this month, your protection fee has to increase. Rowan Red sneered coldly, his eyes sweeping over the floor littered with empty liquor bottles. Serving your customers such cheap booze, is that okay? I'll have the brothers bring over a few dozen crates of Mao Tai for you. Chapter 7, Dead End, Red. Boss Rowan Red, this is just small business, no need to use such fine liquor. William White smiled, but tears were almost falling from his eyes. Rowan Red spat on the ground, his face turning fierce as he cursed, don't be ungrateful. Giving you the lowest wholesale price is just to let you earn a bit more. Besides, I'm doing this out of respect for Bianca, your little sister. William White quickly stepped in front of Rowan Red, smiling obsequiously. Boss Rowan Red, you're absolutely right. I'll take a case of Mao Tai to try selling. Damn it, are you still trying to bargain with me? Rowan Red shoved William White aside, glaring at him. Moments later, his tone softened, why make things hard for yourself? Let Bianca be my mistress, and I wouldn't even charge you for this stock. A sudden laugh broke the tense atmosphere. Kyle Lincoln, who had been silent all along, suddenly chuckled, lazily eyeing the furious Rowan Red. He joked, Mr. William, with that rooster comb hairstyle of his, what makes him think he can pursue Bianca? Does he know how to crow? Rowan Red's face immediately darkened, his thick eyebrows knitting together, making him look even more menacing. Who's this brat daring to mock Boss Rowan Red? Before Rowan Red could respond, one of his lackeys stepped forward, holding a switchblade in his hand, flicking it open and closed arrogantly. Oh no, Boss Rowan Red, please don't get angry. I'll discipline this kid right away. William White was on the verge of tears, frantically pleading. He tried to warn Kyle Lincoln, but Kyle spoke up first, you're ridiculous. Why would I ignore a beautiful girl like Bianca and instead be interested in you? Bianca White's pale, delicate face instantly flushed red with embarrassment. You bastard, this kid deserves a beating. Brothers, get him. Rowan Red's fury erupted. As a local kingpin, if he allowed himself to be mocked without retaliation, he would lose all face. Seeing Rowan Red and his men about to charge, Kyle Lincoln pushed William White aside and said, Mr. William, take care of Bianca. The moment he finished speaking, Kyle Lincoln lunged forward. Rowan Red didn't expect him to move so swiftly and swung his fists wildly. Kyle Lincoln's movements were light and agile, dodging every punch with ease. Then, seemingly without effort, he delivered a kick. The kick appeared gentle, as though it lacked any force. Strangely, Rowan Red couldn't avoid it and could only watch as the kick landed on his stomach. A powerful force followed. Ah! With a loud cry, Rowan Red was sent flying 3 meters away, landing heavily on the ground. Everyone was stunned. What kind of immense force would it take to kick someone into the air like that? Kyle Lincoln stood calmly in place, as if he had just done something completely ordinary. However, deep down, he felt a bit frustrated. This body was truly too weak. He had exerted all his strength, yet the destructive power he could unleash was only this much. If given the chance, he needed to go out and see if there were any spiritual herbs or miraculous plants around. For cultivators, spiritual herbs and miraculous plants held a status equivalent to that of wealth in the hearts of ordinary people. Having such plants meant being able to refine high-grade elixirs, which were immensely beneficial for advancing cultivation with no downsides. The only question was how many naturally occurring spiritual herbs and miraculous plants still existed in this era. You brat! You even dare to hit me? Do you know who my boss is? Rowan Red struggled to get up, clutching his stomach, his face twisted in pain. This voice snapped Kyle Lincoln out of his thoughts. He sneered and asked curiously, Baby Red, Grenade Red, or Dirty Red? Damn it, you must have a death wish. Rowan Red laughed angrily, his gaze shifting to William White and Bianca White. Letting out a cold snort, he said darkly, William White, if you don't seek trouble, trouble won't find you. Hiring this idiot to guard your place, what a foolish decision. Just wait until young Master Arthur Gold returns from the capital. Let's see how he deals with you. Brothers, let's go. With that, Rowan Red slung his arm over the shoulder of the lackey beside him and walked out step by step. William White was momentarily dumbfounded. Young Master Arthur Gold was a figure who wielded great influence in this region. If he truly decided to confront a small-time commoner like William, then William would have no way out. Hashtag Chapter 8, a mysterious background, young man, perhaps you could say a word to Rowan Red on my behalf. William White looked extremely uneasy. He turned awkwardly to Kyle Lincoln, but the next second, his voice suddenly stopped. Slowly, he uttered 2 words, I'm sorry. But Kyle Lincoln was nowhere to be seen. Father, Kyle Lincoln is over there. Bianca White suddenly pointed in a direction, her face filled with astonishment. At some point, Kyle Lincoln had dashed outside, catching up to Rowan Red and appearing at the front entrance. To Rowan Red, Kyle Lincoln now resembled a grim reaper. His entire being exuded a chilling, menacing aura that was indescribably terrifying. Suppressing the fear rising within him, Rowan Red mustered all his courage and asked, What do you want? Just now, you said something I really liked. Kyle Lincoln's smile was dark and eerie, as if enveloped by an impenetrable layer of gloom. It's called, if you don't seek death, you won't die. The same phrase, when uttered by Kyle Lincoln, sent chills down people's spines. Rowan Red's eyes widened in terror, and he quickly stepped back a few paces. You dare hit me? Try it. Want a beating? No problem. Kyle Lincoln flexed his wrists and sneered. This is the first time I've heard such a shameless request. Pfft. Bianca White couldn't hold back and burst into laughter, only to hurriedly cover her mouth. Because Kyle Lincoln's fist had indeed landed squarely on Rowan Red's face. Blood spurted from his nose, his eyes swelled like a panda's, and a large lump formed on his face. In an instant, Rowan Red's demeanor transformed completely. Gone was any trace of his thug-like arrogance. He now looked like a punching bag, inviting anyone to take a swing. Clapping his hands, Kyle Lincoln finally stopped his flurry of punches. You all can get lost now. At his command, Rowan Red and his gang scrambled out of the restaurant in a panic. After running about 10 meters, they suddenly heard Kyle Lincoln's voice again, "Wait, Rowan Red." Like a kite being reeled back in, Rowan Red and his group obediently froze in place. If Kyle told them to go east, they wouldn't dare head west. Kyle Lincoln's voice turned icy. "The day young Master Arthur Gold returns, tell him to come see me directly. If any of you dare harm Uncle William or Bianca, I have 1,000 ways to make your lives worse than death." In the 25th century, Kyle Lincoln's cultivation was profound, his strength unparalleled. He had always been the one bullying others, never tolerating the slightest grievance. So when faced with Rowan Red's arrogance, Kyle Lincoln struck without hesitation, beating him to a pulp to vent his anger. Just recalling the beating made Rowan Red shudder. Forcing a stiff smile, he stammered, "I understand. Now get lost." A minute later, the restaurant finally returned to peace. Bianca White, seemingly unfazed, ran up to Kyle Lincoln, squeezing his biceps and tapping his chest with a look of amazement. "You're incredible. It's the first time I've seen someone fight like that. Have you trained in martial arts?" "Martial arts?" A trace of self-mockery flickered in Kyle Lincoln's heart. In the past, whenever he acted, the results were earth-shattering. Now, he could only display a few martial arts moves to deal with a bunch of street thugs. Well, cultivation can always be started anew, but a life is only given once. Being able to avoid the heavenly tribulation and reincarnate back to the 21st century is already a great fortune. Instead of complaining, why not live this life to the fullest? Did you figure it out? It's really hard to keep one's strength hidden these days. In an instant, Kyle Lincoln cast aside his heavy thoughts and flashed a carefree smile. Bianca White couldn't help but laugh at his remark, her delicate face blooming like a flower, leaving others momentarily dazed. "You brat, stay away from my daughter, or don't even think about staying here." William White, seeing Kyle Lincoln and Bianca White chatting and laughing, grew furious. He only had one daughter and couldn't allow some boy with an unclear background to take an interest in her. Bianca White was long accustomed to William White's grumpy personality and paid him no mind. The next moment, she suddenly reacted and looked at William White with surprised delight. "Dad, does that mean you've decided to let him stay? What choice do I have?" William White glared, now putting on a stern demeanor. "If Rowan Red comes looking for this brat and doesn't find him, he'll surely vent his anger on me. I'm not that foolish." Chapter 9, Stepping onto the path of cultivation. Kyle Lincoln smiled and teased William White, "Uncle William, aren't you worried I might run away?" You wouldn't dare." William White hadn't expected Kyle Lincoln to be so quick-witted, and his face darkened immediately. Kyle Lincoln and Bianca White exchanged amused glances, saying nothing, as words were unnecessary. "There's a small bed in the storage room, you can stay there." William White, realizing Kyle Lincoln was deliberately teasing him, snorted coldly and pointed to a small door to the north. "Big brother Kyle, I'll go get you some bedding." Bianca White quickly offered and darted off, as though afraid William White might change his mind. Watching Bianca White's graceful figure disappear, a faint smile appeared on Kyle Lincoln's face. This girl was meticulous and kind-hearted, a natural talent for becoming a doctor. If given the chance, he'd definitely teach her a few tricks. When they reached the storage room William White mentioned, Bianca White arrived with a brand new set of bedding. The two divided the tasks, one cleaned while the other made the bed. Before long, the small storage room was tidied up. Dusting off her hands and looking at the modest room with a hint of awkwardness, Bianca White smiled and said, "It's not much, but it'll do for now." "It's not bad at all," Kyle Lincoln said, not having high expectations for accommodations. In his previous life, he'd even stayed in mountain caves to harvest spiritual herbs from snowy peaks. Though he didn't complain, Kyle Lincoln wasn't entirely satisfied with the place either. Currently, his cultivation was almost non-existent. To start training again, he would need spiritual energy, which originates from a source called spiritual essence, the fundamental essence of all things nurtured by heaven and earth. To put it simply, imagine a piece of extremely fertile land where anything can grow without artificial fertilizers. Such land might contain a spiritual essence. However, in this city, factories were everywhere, and many spiritual essences had been destroyed by human activities. The spiritual energy was so thin it was pitiful, making it unsuitable for cultivation. Kyle Lincoln was helpless, his body was only slightly stronger than an average person. He relied on food to survive, so he needed to find shelter first, then gradually search for spiritual essence, slowly improving his cultivation. Bianca, this bedsheet, could it be yours? Pulling himself out of his thoughts, Kyle Lincoln's gaze fell on the bedsheet. Only then did he notice it was light pink and decorated with cartoon characters. Bianca White froze for a moment. Her small face turned adorably red as she pouted and said, "Why? Are you saying you don't like me? You're so beautiful, how could I not like you?" Kyle Lincoln found her reaction amusing and couldn't help but ask back. "Humph, as long as you know," Bianca White finally nodded in satisfaction. "All right, rest here. I'll go outside and help my father tidy up a bit." Left alone in the storage room, Kyle Lincoln, feeling energetic, sat on the bed and began cultivating according to the 9 needles of the Sun God technique. The 9 needles of the Sun God technique consists of 7 levels, each further divided into 3 stages, early, mid, and peak. Reaching the peak of the 3rd stage could lead to a successful foundation establishment, marking the beginning of the path of cultivation. The cultivation path is vast and endless, divided into 7 major levels: foundation establishment, golden core, nascent soul, great ascension, void return, true essence, and tribulation transformation. After achieving foundation establishment, one could break their virginity and engage in intimate relations with women. In modern terms, it means sex. The first step was to sense the presence of spiritual energy. Kyle Lincoln held his breath, calmed his mind, and sat cross-legged. He opened all his acupoints, striving to sense a trace of spiritual energy, draw it into his body, and then, through the process of inhaling and exhaling, harmonize it. Using the spiritual energy, he cleansed and nourished his meridians, eventually converting it into a pure strand of spiritual power stored in his spiritual reservoir. The spiritual reservoir, also known as the dantian, is where spiritual power is stored. Focusing all his energy on a single point, Kyle Lincoln transcended the material world, seemingly merging with the entire space around him. Spiritual energy. What surprised Kyle Lincoln was that it didn't take long for him to sense a pure strand of spiritual energy. Though it was just a single strand, it was incredibly pure, unlike the diluted, impure spiritual energy found in the outside world, which could harm the body rather than benefit it. Chapter 10, Using Wine to Nourish the Grass. Hurriedly absorbing the strand of spiritual energy into his body, in an instant, it flowed through each meridian like a stream of water, merging with the yang energy and transforming into a dense spiritual force. Finally, it broke through the barrier between flesh and blood, advancing Kyle Lincoln to the mid-stage of the first level of 9 needles of the Sun God. Reaching the first-level realm would strengthen the flesh and blood of the body, enhancing Kyle Lincoln's physique significantly. However, to fully control the spiritual force at will, long-term cultivation would still be required. Exhaling a breath of turbid air, Kyle Lincoln seemed to transform into a different person. While his appearance remained unchanged, his aura underwent a profound transformation. At this moment, Kyle Lincoln appeared extraordinary, exuding an indescribable heroic spirit. Even dressed in cheap clothing, he radiated an undeniable brilliance. Yet, Kyle Lincoln had no time to focus on his transformation. More important to him was the origin of that strand of spiritual energy. If he could trace the source of this energy and find a spiritual origin, it would be a life-saving treasure for him, like coal in the winter. Inside the warehouse filled with wine barrels, which felt cramped and dusty, Kyle Lincoln paid no mind to the dirt on the barrels and began moving them one by one. Wine blossom herb. A few minutes later, a startled cry escaped from Kyle Lincoln amidst the messy stacks of wine barrels. He had discovered a wine blossom herb growing in the crevice between the barrels and the wall. Though its growth was ordinary, it was perfectly intact, and a faint strand of spiritual energy originated from this very herb. As its name suggests, the wine blossom herb emitted a strong wine fragrance. In Kyle Lincoln's era, it was only used for brewing wine because it contained very little spiritual energy. However, in this situation, the wine blossom herb became a treasure for Kyle Lincoln. If he could cultivate it successfully, it could produce wine blossom flowers. Spiritual herbs, like cultivation levels, were strictly classified into 9 grades, with the first grade being the lowest and the 9th grade the highest. The wine blossom herb was a low-grade spiritual herb, not even considered a proper first-grade herb. However, the wine blossom flower was a genuine first-grade spiritual herb, containing far more spiritual energy than the herb itself. Glancing to the side, Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but chuckle. No wonder a wine blossom herb could grow here. It turned out that in the warehouse, there were 2 large barrels of maiden's blush. For some reason, one of the barrels had a small crack, causing wine to drip into the crevice over the years. The method to cultivate wine blossom herb was precisely to nourish it with maiden's blush. This coincidence had allowed the miraculous wine blossom herb, which was supposed to be cultivated in the 25th century, to appear 4 centuries earlier. Even the heavens are helping me. With this, I should be able to break through to the peak of the first level within 2 months, perhaps even sooner, Kyle Lincoln thought to himself. Arranging the other barrels of wine neatly, leaving only one intact barrel of maiden's blush, Kyle Lincoln, of course, wasn't planning to drink it. He intended to continue nurturing the wine blossom herb, hoping to cultivate a higher-tier wine blossom flower as soon as possible. Opening a jar of maiden's blush, Kyle Lincoln poured the wine generously over the wine blossom herb without hesitation. Bang! As he was happily watering, the door to the room was suddenly slammed open. Kyle Lincoln looked up, just in time to see the furious face of William White. He couldn't help but offer a wry smile. "Uncle William, I can explain." "Explain." William White stormed into the storage room, rubbed his eyes several times to confirm, and saw that the wine Kyle Lincoln was pouring out was indeed the long-preserved maiden's blush. His entire body trembled with rage, his face flushed red as he pointed at Kyle Lincoln's nose and scolded, "What explanation could you possibly give? Don't tell me this plant is some miraculous remedy or something. Even if it is, you can't just use wine to water it. Are you out of your mind?" Kyle Lincoln was momentarily stunned. Suddenly, he didn't know how to explain. He couldn't possibly tell William White, "Congratulations, uncle, you guessed right. This is indeed a miraculous herb." If he did, William White probably wouldn't stop at just scolding him but might even consider killing him on the spot. The two stood staring at each other, and for a moment, the atmosphere became somewhat awkward. "You brat, first take those barrels of wine outside, we have customers coming." William White was the first to break the silence, pointing at the barrels of beer behind Kyle Lincoln with a displeased expression as he gave his orders. "Got it." Knowing he was in the wrong, Kyle Lincoln could only put aside his task of nurturing the plant and help William White handle the tavern's business. Chapter 11, the upgraded beer version. William White saw that he was still obedient, intentionally making things a bit difficult for him. Pointing at 4 crates of beer, he said, "You have half a minute to carry these 4 crates outside. If you delay the customers drinking, it'll cause trouble." Kyle Lincoln smiled, unbothered, squatted down, and without appearing to exert any effort, lifted all 4 crates of beer at once. For an average person, carrying 2 crates at the same time would already be considered strong. Yet Kyle Lincoln managed 4 crates, and he did so effortlessly, walking briskly out of the storage room. William White's mouth fell open in shock. Having spent his entire life working in restaurants and enduring plenty of hard labor in his youth, he had never encountered anyone as strong as Kyle Lincoln. More importantly, strength is typically proportional to physique, but Kyle Lincoln didn't even look muscular. How could he unleash such terrifying power? Recalling Kyle Lincoln's agility when dealing with Rowan Red, William White couldn't help but fall into deep thought. By the time he also exited the storage room, his attitude toward Kyle Lincoln had improved slightly. "Kid, thank you." "Ah. No need to be so polite." Kyle Lincoln was slightly taken aback. How could William White's demeanor change so quickly in the blink of an eye? William White rubbed his hands together, his face showing a hint of excitement. He chuckled and said, "Kid, you wasted so much of my maiden's blush, but I won't hold it against you. However, I do have a small request." "Let me see." Kyle Lincoln had no idea what he was up to. Feeling both amused and helpless, he said, "Uncle William, just say what you want directly. I've already asked Bianca to help you with your work arrangements. For the next few days, you can stay here. But when you're free, help me out with some errands as a way to pay for your lodging. How does that sound?" William White no longer hesitated and laid it out plainly. Kyle Lincoln suddenly understood. So Uncle William had his eyes on his strength. For someone so calculating, his daughter, Bianca White, was sharp and adorable. This family was truly intriguing. Kyle Lincoln chuckled inwardly but cheerfully agreed on the surface, "That's the least I can do. It's just, about the maiden's blush. I already told you, didn't I? Don't argue with me." Uncle William waved his hand, appearing generous. "You misunderstood, Uncle. What I mean is that the amount of maiden's blush might not be enough." Kyle Lincoln knew his words might come across as offensive, but to quickly cultivate the inebriating blossom, he had no choice but to shamelessly ask, "Could I trouble you to get a bit more?" William White's face instantly darkened. He looked at Kyle Lincoln as if he were some kind of monster. "You want maiden's blush just to water plants?" Kyle Lincoln nodded. "You." William White was so furious he almost spat blood. After a moment, he finally calmed himself down and spoke irritably, "Fine. But you have to work harder. If you can't manage, don't bother with the job Bianca found for you. Help me handle the business here first." Kyle Lincoln smiled. He didn't care much about work. After all, what he needed wasn't money but time to cultivate and strive to break through the first peak as soon as possible. "William White, where's our wine? It's still not here." Suddenly, an impatient voice echoed from the main hall. "Coming right up." William White responded and unceremoniously ordered Kyle Lincoln, "Hurry up and bring the wine to the guests." Kyle Lincoln picked up a keg of beer and strode into the main hall, taking on the role of a server. He helped the guests open each bottle of beer, but then his brows furrowed. Picking up a bottle, he sniffed it. The scent of hops hit his nose, pungent, bitter, and overwhelmingly harsh. "This is supposed to be wine." Kyle Lincoln disdainfully put the beer bottle down, his expression full of contempt. The guests were stunned. Someone else picked up a bottle, sniffed it, and then laughed heartily. "Kid, that's how beer is supposed to smell. You're too young to understand, so stop talking nonsense." Kyle Lincoln curiously asked, "Does all beer have this flavor?" "Different brands have slightly different tastes, but they're generally the same." Kyle Lincoln didn't argue further. He quietly pondered. In the 25th century, although winemaking techniques had been refined across various levels, improvements were mostly limited to red, white, and yellow wines, leaving beer largely untouched. However, this particular beer was indeed different from anything he'd tasted before. Chapter 12, Passing the Interview Round, What are you mumbling about over there? Get back to work. William White, hearing the commotion in the main hall, feared Kyle Lincoln might ruin his business. He quickly whispered, trying to reason with him, "Don't you still have to take care of your weeds? Why are you still hanging around here? William White's words suddenly made Kyle Lincoln realize something. The reason why this type of wine is different from anything I've ever tasted lies fundamentally in the inebriating blossom. Uncle William, I can help you brew better beer, do you believe me? Leaving this statement behind, Kyle Lincoln immediately returned to the warehouse, leaving William White and the guests dumbfounded. The inebriating blossom only grows into one plant, and each plant has 5 branches. Although feeling a bit regretful, Kyle Lincoln thought William White wasn't a bad person, and since he was Bianca White's father, he decided to help him more. Carefully plucking one branch of the inebriating blossom, Kyle Lincoln took a small bottle, placed the branch inside, and ran to the kitchen, hanging the bottle over the fire to gently heat it. A few minutes later, the branch of the inebriating blossom melted, turning into half a bottle of light green liquid, crystal clear, resembling a piece of jade. As Kyle Lincoln stepped out of the kitchen, he happened to see a radiant and beautiful figure looking around, seemingly searching for someone. Bianca, your father is probably in the main hall, Kyle Lincoln smiled and reminded her. Who cares about him? I'm looking for you. Bianca White's eyes lit up as she stared at Kyle Lincoln and said, you seem even more handsome than before. Really? Kyle Lincoln chuckled. Having reached the mid-stage of the 9 needles of the sun god's first level, his vitality and spirit were greatly enhanced, which in Bianca White's eyes translated to him looking more attractive. I've already spoken with Mr. Gold. Tomorrow, I'll take you to the school for an interview. However, Mr. Gold is currently on a business trip, so he can only provide a recommendation for you, the rest will be up to you. Speaking of this, Bianca White lowered her head, appearing somewhat apologetic. Kyle Lincoln didn't expect this girl to care so much about his affairs. Feeling touched, he smiled and said, with my skills, do you think I can't pass an interview? Bianca White giggled mischievously, winking as she said, if you succeed in the interview, you'll have to treat me to something nice. After speaking, Bianca White started calculating what she wanted Kyle Lincoln to treat her to. Seeing her serious demeanor, Kyle Lincoln stared at her in a daze. This girl was both innocent and a bit wild, so much better than the elegant but pragmatic women he had encountered before. By the way, what are you holding? Bianca White's question immediately snapped Kyle Lincoln out of his thoughts. Holding up the inebriating blossom liquid, he smiled mysteriously, this is a treasure. Come, I'll show you. Leading Bianca White back to the main hall, they saw the diners happily toasting and drinking. William White was sitting at the cash register, beaming with joy, likely having earned a good amount from the wine sales. Kyle Lincoln smiled as he approached and said to William White, Uncle William, I've brought the beer brewing formula. Let's try it now, shall we? Is this all you have? William White glanced up briefly, then showed a disdainful expression, impatiently pointing behind him, go back to where you came from. Stop causing trouble. Beer is not a cocktail, how can it be mixed to create a different taste? Even if you add some fruit juice or whatever, wouldn't it ruin the beer's flavor? William White has been running a restaurant for many years, so he knows a thing or two about alcohol. Dad, just let Kyle try once. At most, it'll only cost you 1 bottle of beer, Bianca White said, dissatisfied with William White's attitude, standing in front of Kyle Lincoln to defend him. William White threw the account book onto the table, glaring as he said, Bianca, why are you always siding with this brat? Let me tell you, don't get too close to him. Be careful, he might have bad intentions toward you. Dad! Can you be serious for once? Bianca White blushed, reaching out to pinch William White's arm hard. Ouch! William White cried out in pain, glaring fiercely at Kyle Lincoln before impatiently waving his hand. The beer's over there, go try it yourself. But I'm warning you, only open 1 bottle. Kyle Lincoln smiled and led Bianca White toward the beer bottles. Before mixing, Bianca White whispered quietly to Kyle Lincoln, that's just how my dad is. Don't take his words to heart, okay? Chapter 13, the price must be absolutely reasonable, but I already took it to heart, Kyle Lincoln said, deliberately putting on a serious face. Bianca White was stunned. Kyle Lincoln smirked mischievously and said, because I really do have intentions toward you. You're so annoying. Bianca White blushed, turning her head away without saying another word. Did she really not realize how captivating she was when she acted like that? Kyle Lincoln chuckled at himself, thinking that the label of premature guy still hadn't been shaken off. Yet, he couldn't help but tease whenever he was near a beautiful woman. Alright then, let's mix the beer first. Taking a deep breath, Kyle Lincoln opened a bottle of beer, tilted the small vial in his hand, and poured out just a single drop of herbal liquor essence. With a crisp pop, the essence instantly dissolved into the beer, causing a dramatic transformation. A rich, indescribable aroma of liquor wafted out from the narrow bottle neck. Within less than half a minute, the entire hall was filled with this intoxicating scent, even overpowering the aroma of the food. It smells amazing. Bianca White, being the closest, was the first to react, looking at Kyle Lincoln in astonishment. More accurately, she was staring at the bottle of beer. Kyle Lincoln shook the bottle lightly and grinned, I told you, I'm great at mixing drinks. Fine, you're great, whatever, Bianca White joked, then turned to William White, Dad, did you smell that? This scent is from the beer Kyle mixed. William White, who had been looking around for the source of the aroma, froze upon hearing Bianca's words. He glared at Kyle Lincoln for a moment before finally speaking, You brat, you've got some skill. Now hand it over, let me try it. Taking the freshly mixed bottle of beer, William White only needed a whiff to feel invigorated and refreshed, an indescribable sensation. Excellent beer. After taking a few large gulps, William White still wasn't satisfied. Reflecting for a moment, he could only utter 2 words. Bianca White was astonished as she looked at her father. She knew her father was very knowledgeable about wine, and it was rare for any wine to satisfy him this much. Thinking of this, Bianca White became even more amazed by Kyle Lincoln and couldn't help but ask, You know medicine, and you know how to mix drinks. I really want to know what else you're good at. Without thinking, Kyle Lincoln instinctively replied, I'm even better at flirting. Huh. Bianca White was stunned, her small face blushing like a ripe peach, so luscious it seemed as if it could drip juice. Fortunately, Kyle Lincoln's voice wasn't loud, otherwise, with just those few words, the favorable impression William White had just formed thanks to the new beer would have crumbled instantly. Bianca White secretly reached out and pinched Kyle Lincoln, her large, sparkling eyes glimmering with a shy yet captivating charm. Kyle Lincoln only felt as if his waist was being gently massaged, an indescribable sense of comfort washing over him. William White, what are you drinking? Let me have a taste. The other diners also put down their beers, staring intently at the bottle in William White's hand as if their stomachs were growling with hunger. Unfortunately, the bottle was already empty, drained completely by William White. William White stood up, his face beaming. Don't worry, everyone. I'll get some for you right away. With that, William White grabbed Kyle Lincoln's arm and whispered slyly, Kid, how did you make this drink? It's called Fragrant Blossoms Water, a secret liquor blend. Just 1 drop into beer can transform it into what you just had. Kyle Lincoln handed over the Fragrant Blossoms Water, but before he could finish explaining, William White had snatched the bottle, his eyes gleaming with greed. Without listening to another word, he quickly grabbed several bottles of beer and dashed off. When he returned, the aroma of the liquor filled the room. The diners, enchanted by the scent, looked as though they could hardly wait to dive in and quench their thirst. William White laid out the bottles, a cunning smile on his face. These are premium drinks from my personal stash. You can't find these outside. I'm not asking for much, just 100 per bottle. Quite reasonable, isn't it? 100. Everyone gasped in shock. Kyle Lincoln felt even more uneasy. Although inebriating blossom was rare, it wouldn't be long before he could cultivate it in abundance. Just a single drop of extract, how could it be worth so much? Your father is too greedy, Kyle Lincoln muttered helplessly, rubbing his nose as he spoke quietly to Bianca White beside him. #### Chapter 14, Don't grab there. Bianca White lowered her head, her cheeks flushed red all the way to her ears, wishing she could find a hole to crawl into. Especially when she saw the diners pulling out their wallets to pay, Bianca White felt even more embarrassed. Several times, she wanted to persuade her father otherwise, but Kyle Lincoln stopped her each time. Rarity adds value. From that perspective, your father isn't entirely wrong, Kyle Lincoln said with a smile, sharing his thoughts. If these people are willing to spend money on the drink, it means they aren't short on cash. Why save money for them? Fair enough, Bianca White replied, sticking out her tongue playfully, looking adorably mischievous. The diners not only praised this delicious beer but also enjoyed their meals more, with each table ordering at least 3 additional dishes. In the blink of an eye, the restaurant's revenue had doubled. When the restaurant closed, William White couldn't contain his excitement. While flipping through the accounts, he chuckled gleefully, occasionally muttering, "The God of wealth has blessed us," which made Kyle Lincoln and Bianca White laugh even harder. In high spirits, William White planned to have a small drink, but the new beer had sold out completely. He muttered to himself, "All the beer is gone. These drinkers didn't even leave me a bottle." However, there was still plenty of fragrant blossoms water left. William White could drink as much of it as he wanted. William White opened a bottle of beer, carefully poured in a single drop, then paused and muttered, "I'm drinking this myself, why should I be so stingy?" After saying that, he added 4 more drops. "Hey, don't drink that." At that moment, Kyle Lincoln, who was helping Bianca White clean up the dishes, caught sight of William White's actions out of the corner of his eye and was startled. Unfortunately, Kyle Lincoln's warning came too late. After just a few sips of beer, William White felt the world spinning, as if he were floating on clouds. The moment he set the bottle down, he collapsed to the floor with a thud. Bianca White screamed in fear and rushed to her father's side, calling out to him repeatedly. "Mr. Kyle, is my father going to be okay?" Bianca White looked up at Kyle Lincoln, her face full of worry. "He's just drunk from adding 5 drops of the fragrant blossoms water. A good sleep will fix him," Kyle Lincoln replied, both amused and exasperated as he looked at William White. Helping him up, Kyle added, "Good thing he didn't pour in the entire bottle, or he might have been drunk to death and never woken up." "That's so exaggerated," Bianca White exclaimed, her mouth agape in shock. She picked up the bottle of fragrant blossoms water, held it under her delicate nose, and took a couple of light sniffs. A captivating aroma filled her senses, making her let out a soft, involuntary moan. At the same time, an overwhelming drowsiness washed over her. Seeing Bianca White staggering and about to fall, Kyle Lincoln quickly supported William White and moved just in time to catch Bianca as she collapsed into his arms. Kyle Lincoln could only feel a wave of helplessness, his head filled with black lines as he smiled wryly. One person knocked out by drinking it, another by merely smelling it. What kind of situation is this? With no other choice, Kyle Lincoln carried both of them to their rooms. As he laid Bianca White on the bed, she instinctively reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck. "So hot," she murmured in a seductive voice, which instantly made Kyle Lincoln feel a rush of heat. It was as if a stream of liquid was about to break through his nose and flow out. Nosebleed. When Kyle Lincoln noticed, a drop of blood had already fallen onto the bedsheet, quickly spreading into a circle as large as a coin. "Oh no!" Kyle Lincoln was startled, hurriedly grabbing some tissues to stop the bleeding while frantically trying to clean the bedsheet. However, the fabric absorbed the blood too well, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't completely remove the stain. Feeling helpless, Kyle Lincoln shrugged and gave up. The nosebleed was due to Kyle Lincoln practicing the 9 needles of the sun god technique. The excessive yang energy in his body was overwhelming, and since he hadn't yet mastered control over it, any slight stimulation would cause the energy to become chaotic, manifesting as a nosebleed. "So hot," Bianca White's voice rang out, soft and teasing, like a feather brushing against Kyle Lincoln's heart. It made every inch of his skin, even every pore, feel as if they were burning, igniting an uncontrollable fire within him. Kyle Lincoln tried his best to suppress the rising urge, but Bianca White was far from calm. Her small hands waved aimlessly in the air, and once they grabbed hold of Kyle Lincoln, they wouldn't let go. "Don't grab there." In his panic to dodge, Kyle Lincoln suddenly froze. Chapter 15. Beyond reach. Bianca White's right hand had accidentally grabbed his little brother, and to make matters worse, after gripping it, she smacked her lips in satisfaction as if she had just won a contest. She no longer complained about the heat. Kyle Lincoln nearly burst into tears. His mental fortitude wasn't strong enough yet, and facing such temptation, it was incredibly difficult to suppress the chaotic yang energy within him. What seemed like a minor impulse could, in fact, harm his cultivation progress. "Bianca, let go for now. Brother Kyle will get you a glass of water, okay?" Kyle Lincoln softened his tone, coaxing her as if she were a child. In reality, Bianca White was indeed like a child. She pouted in dissatisfaction and shook her head, her grip tightening in her half-dazed state. Kyle Lincoln could only groan in frustration, torn between exasperation and reluctant enjoyment. "How can I, the proud leader of the Order of the Celestial Physicians, be bullied like this by a little girl?" Kyle Lincoln, naturally competitive, decided to mentally reframe the situation, imagining Bianca White as his opponent. Muttering to himself, a sudden idea struck him. "That's it. I've mastered so many secret TCM techniques, why not use one or two to help her sober up?" Perhaps Bianca White's allure was too overwhelming, causing Kyle Lincoln to momentarily forget everything he knew about traditional Chinese medicine. Taking a deep breath, Kyle Lincoln rubbed his hands together to generate warmth. In a gentle voice, he said, "Bianca, I need to lift your shirt a little. Please forgive me." Lifting the pristine white short-sleeved shirt, it revealed a flat, fair abdomen. Placing his hand on it, the sensation from his fingertips was more intoxicating than the finest wine enhanced by aromatic liquor essence. Shaking his head firmly, Kyle Lincoln barely managed to regain his composure. Taking a deep breath, he gently massaged Bianca White's abdomen in a clockwise motion, targeting the divine deficiency in kidney's gateway acupoints. With each motion, the sacred peaks on Bianca White's chest slightly quivered, causing Kyle Lincoln's mind to wander. He wanted to look away but felt an inexplicable force pulling his gaze back, leaving him unable to resist. There was no other choice, he had to endure. After approximately 40 repetitions, the redness on Bianca White's face gradually faded. Although she had been enchanted by the aromatic liquor, this was indeed her first time being intoxicated. Following the abdominal massage to soothe her liver and relieve stagnation, another round was needed to strengthen her stomach and provide warmth. Kyle Lincoln used just one finger, pausing on the soft abdomen before slowly moving upward, stopping right below her chest. The continuous friction between these two areas achieved results that many medications could not. After a while of massaging, Kyle Lincoln helped Bianca White adjust her clothing. The next step was simply to wait. Gradually, Bianca White's delicate face returned to normal, appearing even more radiant and rosy, like a juicy peach tempting someone to take a bite. "Brother Kyle, did I fall asleep?" "Half asleep," Bianca White instinctively muttered. Kyle Lincoln found it strange, though she was clearly sober, why did she still appear so dazed? Bianca White tilted her head, pondering for a while before smiling and saying, "I only took a sniff, yet I got drunk. Brother Kyle, that wine is truly potent." "Who could disagree?" Kyle Lincoln responded with a wry smile. "I'm sorry." Bianca White lowered her head. Spotting a red mark on the bedsheet, she stared at it in confusion. Suddenly realizing something, her face turned beet red, burning as if it were on fire. What did you do to me? When Bianca White raised her head, her tone immediately became much sterner, glaring directly at Kyle Lincoln. #### Chapter 16, Pure Spiritual Power. I was just helping you sober up, Kyle Lincoln said blankly. Then, noticing Bianca White's gaze, he suddenly understood and broke out in a cold sweat. You've misunderstood a bit. At this moment, Kyle Lincoln felt more wronged than Doe. Then tell me, what exactly have I misunderstood? If her clothes weren't still intact and her body didn't feel any different, Bianca White would have had a hard time staying calm. Kyle Lincoln blushed and helplessly explained, that's my nosebleed. Time seemed to pause for a second. Really? Bianca White asked, half doubting. Of course, it's true. Kyle Lincoln, feeling exasperated, blurted out, if it were really your virgin blood, how could there be just a tiny bit? Think about it yourself. Bianca White thought carefully for a moment, her embarrassment deepening. She raised her small fist and rained punches down on Kyle Lincoln, pouting, "You're so annoying. How could you even say something like that?" Kyle Lincoln remained silent. If I didn't explain, after just one day of being reborn, I'd already be misunderstood by someone. That would be too unbearable. By the way, where's my father? Bianca White, sensing the awkward atmosphere, quickly changed the subject. Kyle Lincoln smiled and teased, Uncle William drank too much. He probably needs a good sleep. I'll go make him some hangover soup. When he wakes up tomorrow morning and drinks it, he won't have a headache. Thank you, you're so kind. Bianca White smiled bitterly and lowered her head. My father always takes advantage of you, yet you never hold it against him. Uncle William is just a bit greedy. That's not a big fault, nothing worth holding a grudge over. Bianca White nodded, seemingly lost in thought. Her gaze drifted far away as she softly said, if it weren't for me, he wouldn't be so money-hungry. In truth, it's all because of me. Kyle Lincoln frowned slightly and gently asked, do you want to tell me about it? Raising a college student isn't easy. Most of the money my father worked so hard to earn had to be spent on me, Bianca White explained briefly, her eyes glimmering with emotion. Kyle Lincoln knew there was likely more to the story but didn't press further. Instead, he spoke in a relaxed tone to comfort her, with the fragrant wine elixir I gave him, his business will surely improve. Bianca White nodded earnestly, her small face lighting up with a radiant smile. Suddenly, her expression tensed, and she anxiously asked, do you think Rowan Red might send young Master Arthur Gold to cause trouble? Kyle Lincoln's brows immediately furrowed tightly, and an invisible aura of authority began to gather. Later, Kyle Lincoln regained his relaxed demeanor, don't worry, as long as I'm here, whether it's young Master Arthur Gold or young Master Silver, I won't show them any respect. Hee, you're the best. Bianca White playfully stuck out her tongue and leaned against the headboard, chatting with Kyle Lincoln about all sorts of random topics. Their laughter occasionally filled the room, creating an atmosphere of joy. When Bianca White started feeling sleepy again, Kyle Lincoln left her room, prepared a bowl of hangover soup for William White, and then returned to the storage room. Sitting cross-legged on his bed, he began cultivating. Perhaps it was during Bianca White's drunken state that Kyle Lincoln managed to resist various temptations. Although there wasn't much progress with the 9 needles of the sun god technique, his spiritual consciousness had noticeably improved. For members of the Order of the Celestial Physicians, spiritual consciousness was sometimes even more important than cultivation levels. Whether it was alchemy, medicine-making, talisman crafting, or acupuncture, all required a strong spiritual consciousness. The night passed without Kyle Lincoln resting, yet he didn't feel tired. On the contrary, he felt refreshed. This was the benefit of having a powerful spiritual consciousness. Not only that, but his meridians were also significantly stronger than the previous day. They were no longer hollow but carried a trace of pure spiritual energy flowing through them. This was clearly a good sign. After washing up, William White emerged from his bedroom, stretching luxuriously and looking extremely relaxed. But the moment he saw Kyle Lincoln, a shadow of annoyance crossed William White's face. "Kid, why didn't you warn me that the fragrant wine elixir shouldn't be consumed in excess? Who told you to be so greedy, not even asking before gulping it down?" Although only a day had passed, Kyle Lincoln and William White had grown somewhat familiar with each other. Kyle couldn't help but joke, "Uncle William, there's still half a bottle of beer left. Want to take a sip? They say a morning drink can really perk you up." "Get lost. I'm not falling for your tricks," William White grumbled, deliberately bumping into Kyle Lincoln as he passed. "Move aside, I need to use the bathroom." Kyle Lincoln chuckled and stepped aside as William White walked past. Breakfast was prepared by Bianca White. It was simple but heartwarming. After finishing their meal, Bianca White stood up and said, "Kyle, I'll take you to the school for your application." "Going today already?" William White immediately voiced his dissatisfaction. "There's still a lot of work to do in the shop." Bianca White glared at William White and reminded him, "Dad doesn't even pay Kyle a salary, yet you keep taking advantage of him. Why are you siding with an outsider?" William White knew he was being unreasonable and could only mutter this after a long pause. Kyle Lincoln laughed heartily. Before leaving, he took a few stones out of his pocket, placed them on the table, and instructed, "These stones can explode. If Rowan Red and his gang come looking for trouble again, just throw these at them. Don't hold back." These were explosive stones Kyle Lincoln had casually crafted the previous night while cultivating to practice controlling his spiritual energy. They weren't complicated to make, just infuse them with spiritual energy and say the word "spirit" to trigger a small explosion. Explosion? William White looked skeptical. "Do you think I'm a child?" Kyle Lincoln sighed helplessly, picked up a stone, softly chanted "Lin," and threw it far out the window. Boom! A sharp explosion suddenly echoed. The sound wasn't too loud, more like a television falling from the third floor. But the noise was enough to scare William White. He fell to the ground, staring wide-eyed out the window. The flower pots outside were shattered into pieces, with soil and flowers scattered who knows where. "Wow, the stone is amazing!" Bianca White exclaimed excitedly, running up to Kyle Lincoln and reaching for a stone. "This isn't a toy, don't mess around with it." William White suddenly scrambled up from the ground, snatching the stone from Bianca White's hand. Carefully gathering the stones on the table, he shakily approached Kyle Lincoln, handing them back with trembling hands. "You're not helping me, you're trying to get me killed. Take these back." Bianca White frowned and quickly stepped in front of William White, saying, "Dad, what are you doing? Brother Kyle gave you these stones to protect you from Rowan Red causing trouble. Why are you giving them back? Be quiet. This doesn't concern you." William White snapped sternly, his eyes wide, scaring Bianca White into silence. "Kyle Lincoln, I must have been blind not to recognize you as a master before. Today, I've seen it clearly. This small house can't accommodate a great figure like you. You should leave quickly and take these stones with you." "I don't dare keep them," William White pleaded, looking at Kyle Lincoln with a face full of desperation. Kyle Lincoln sighed helplessly, taking a step back. "Uncle William, I'm helping you, yet now you want to chase me away. That's a bit unreasonable, don't you think?" "Ridiculous." Kyle Lincoln had just discovered that William's wine cellar contained inebriating blossom, something he needed to restore his spiritual energy. "Leaving now? Not a chance. We're just ordinary people. Clearly, we didn't recognize Mount Tai when it stood before us. Are you from some special forces or a mercenary sent to complete a mission? We don't want to get involved. Please spare us, we don't want to play this game." William White pleaded, his aged face filled with terror as he looked at Kyle Lincoln. After listening for a while, Kyle Lincoln finally understood. Not only did William White fail to appreciate his help, but because the stone was so powerful, he had mistaken Kyle for some kind of supernatural figure. In Kyle Lincoln's era, the stone was nothing special. It couldn't even harm a person, let alone touch a strand of hair. But in the 21st century, it was different. It had the power of half a grenade. If it exploded near someone, it could genuinely maim them. Uncle William, don't worry. I'm nobody special, just an ordinary person who was abandoned and nearly killed. These stones are something I brought with me, they have nothing to do with me. If you don't want them, fine. Kyle Lincoln took the stones back and turned to leave. #### Chapter 18, The Uncontrollable Rage. Bianca White stood anxiously by the side, quickly rushing to Kyle Lincoln, grabbing his arm, and looking at William White as she said, "Father, what are you doing? Kyle just made you such excellent wine yesterday, and today you're driving him away. Don't you want to make money anymore?" William White froze, a glimmer of greed flashing in his eyes. Just thinking about yesterday's accounts made him unable to suppress a smile. Money, or life? William White's mind was in turmoil, weighing the two things he valued most, both of which he was reluctant to part with. "Unless you agree to make this wine for me from now on, otherwise, I'll let you go." William White hesitated for a long time before gritting his teeth and speaking. Kyle Lincoln let out a sigh of relief and quickly replied, "No problem, Uncle William. Since I'm here with you, of course, I'll work. From now on, I'll be responsible for making wine for you." "Fine, fine, go, go. I'm tired of seeing the two of you." William White waved them off impatiently, shaking his head as he returned to his tasks. Bianca White chuckled softly, grabbing Kyle Lincoln's large hand without looking at him, and led him out of White's wandering kitchen. Kyle Lincoln followed her with a satisfied expression. Bianca White's small hand was smooth and soft, like silk, warm and tender in his grasp. Unable to resist, he gently squeezed it. "Ah! Kyle, what are you doing?" Bianca White exclaimed, quickly pulling her hand back. Her face flushed red with embarrassment. Sorry, I couldn't help myself," Kyle Lincoln said awkwardly, scratching his nose. Bianca White huffed at him and ignored him, striding forward quickly. Kyle Lincoln grinned sheepishly and followed her as they moved ahead. Bianca White was leading Kyle Lincoln to a place called the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing. It was considered the largest university in Mid-Sea and was renowned nationwide for its medical programs. Graduates from the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing were highly sought after by major hospitals, and even the personal doctors of the nation's leaders were alumni of this prestigious institution. This reputation had solidified the Academy's illustrious status. After walking for over half an hour, Bianca White and Kyle Lincoln finally arrived in front of an enormous campus. "Look, across this street, that's the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing," Bianca White said proudly, pointing to the massive academy ahead. Following her gaze, a trace of satisfaction appeared on Kyle Lincoln's face. In front of a towering, imposing gate at the center, its height straight and majestic, lay the academy. Inside were closely packed high-rise buildings, bustling with people moving about, including no shortage of girls with figures captivating enough to draw the attention of any young man. 5 large words caught the eye, carved into the stone wall beside the grand gate, prompting Kyle Lincoln to mutter, "Mid-Sea Academy of Healing." By the 25th century, the traditional school system had long been abolished. All educational institutions were centralized, and every subject was taught virtually, transmitted directly into the brain through advanced technology. As long as one could absorb the information, it was considered equivalent to completing all university programs. This 21st century style school was something Kyle Lincoln was witnessing for the first time. "Those legs are so fair." Kyle Lincoln's eyes were glued to a female student in a short skirt, and he nearly drooled. Cultivating the 9 needles of the sun god came with a major drawback, an overabundance of yang energy. Without energy to balance it, deviations in cultivation could occur, leading to inner turmoil or even failure during tribulation, resulting in death. Having just reincarnated into this body, Kyle Lincoln's current physical state was still very weak. His cultivation level was far too low, leaving him unable to control these desires. The sight of beautiful women, especially those with fair skin and revealing attire, made it impossible for him to resist looking. University life is so amazing. Why didn't our universities have this? If I could study here, I wouldn't have spent all my time wandering around the gardens of the cultivation world, Kyle Lincoln muttered discontentedly, wiping the drool from his mouth. Have you stared enough? Suddenly, an annoyed voice rang out, snapping Kyle Lincoln back to reality. He quickly turned around. Yes, I've seen enough. Kyle Lincoln replied with an awkward laugh. Bianca White glared at him. With dissatisfaction, let out a soft huff, and strode forward. Kyle Lincoln watched Bianca White's retreating figure, her long, fair legs faintly visible beneath her short skirt, stirring an uncontrollable frenzy within him. After zoning out for a moment, Kyle Lincoln decided to abandon such thoughts. Given his current low cultivation level, it was best not to dwell on such matters. Hashtag Chapter 19, a major shock. Mid-Sea Academy of Healing spans dozens of acres and is divided into more than 10 specialties. The student body alone numbers in the tens of thousands. Adding professors, researchers, doctoral candidates, and various other resources, the entire academy boasts a population of 50 to 60,000, Bianca White explained to Kyle Lincoln as they walked, though her expression remained grim. 50 to 60,000 people. If half of them are female. A sea of white suddenly filled Kyle Lincoln's imagination, accompanied by images vivid enough to make one's nose bleed. Bianca White cast Kyle Lincoln a glance but chose to ignore him, continuing toward the teaching building ahead. The infirmary at Mid-Sea Academy of Healing was located within the teaching building. Its purpose was to provide immediate care for students in emergencies, ensuring they receive timely treatment. The teaching building is divided into 6 floors in total. From the 1st to the 5th floor, there are classrooms and offices, while the 6th floor houses the offices of advisors and professors. Of course, this is merely the teaching building for one specific major. Bianca White led Kyle Lincoln into the teaching building, and Kyle immediately noticed 5 female students helping another girl, who looked to be in severe pain, quickly heading toward the staircase. Kyle furrowed his brows. The girl's face was pale, drenched in sweat, her once beautiful features distorted with pain. Her arms hung limply, and she couldn't even lift her head. It was clear at a glance that her condition was serious. Someone is sick. Perfect timing, we should go over there and see if we can help, Bianca said anxiously to Kyle before hastily moving forward. Kyle originally thought Bianca would lead him upstairs, but to his surprise, as they reached the staircase, she led him downward instead. The basement, yes, the medical room was located in the basement. Kyle followed Bianca down to the basement with no choice. Under the bright lights, the small sign for the medical room came into clear view before him. Seeing the scene in front of him, Kyle finally understood why the medical room was located in the basement. On the walls of every room in the basement hung signs indicating they were medical rooms. Each room had people constantly coming and going, all dressed in white lab coats. Clearly, they were all doctors working in the medical facility. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 medical rooms. What is this all about? Kyle counted, astonished. We're a medical school. Many students conduct medical experiments, and sometimes they even test on themselves. As a result, emergencies happen frequently. That's why the school set up so many medical rooms. Enough talking, let's go check on that girl, Bianca said hurriedly, pulling Kyle into one of the medical rooms. Ah! As soon as they entered, a painful cry echoed from inside the medical room. A girl lay on the bed, writhing in agony. It was the same girl Kyle and Bianca had seen earlier. Master Alexander Gold. Bianca exclaimed joyfully upon seeing an elderly man in a white coat inside the medical room. Ah, Bianca, it's you. Take a seat for now, I'll talk to you later, the elderly man said sternly, clearly too preoccupied to pay much attention to her. He bent over, intently using a stethoscope to examine the girl on the bed. Around the elderly man were 3 or 4 other doctors, all discussing the girl's condition. Their faces bore expressions of confusion, evidently unable to determine how to treat her. The elderly man furrowed his brows in puzzlement as he continued listening with the stethoscope. Shoulder periarthritis also requires the use of a stethoscope, and yet you've been listening for so long without figuring it out. Are these really doctors? Kyle Lincoln asked loudly, looking at Bianca White in confusion. The medical room was not very large, and Kyle Lincoln's loud voice immediately drew everyone's attention, including the elderly man, all of whom turned to look at Kyle Lincoln. Kyle Lincoln, stop talking nonsense. Bianca White hurriedly gave Kyle Lincoln a light slap. Where are you from? What nonsense are you spouting? How could this possibly be shoulder periarthritis? If you don't understand, don't speak recklessly. Get out. A male doctor, appearing to be around 30 years old, looked at Kyle Lincoln with a dissatisfied expression. Being disrespected for his medical skills and even having his status as a doctor questioned was a great insult to him. Chapter 20, The Miracle of Acupuncture. If you can't do it, just admit it. Refusing to listen to the truth, how arrogant. This is just cervical spondylosis, an easy condition to treat. Why does it require so much research? Kyle Lincoln retorted, unable to tolerate being spoken to in such a manner. If you're so skilled, then go ahead and treat it. Show me you can cure it. The male doctor angrily pointed at Kyle Lincoln. Bianca White quickly stood up, embarrassed, and said, I'm sorry, this is my friend. He's just come from the countryside and lacks manners. Please don't mind him. Please continue, everyone, please continue. Kyle Lincoln, stop speaking nonsense. Kyle Lincoln was once the master of the Order of the Celestial Physicians. He managed the entire order, and his medical skills had reached an extraordinary level. Using the 9 needles of the sun god technique, he roamed the cultivation world, treating even the injuries of cultivators. He was known for his miraculous acupuncture skills. Being spoken to in such a way now, Kyle Lincoln couldn't tolerate it. If you want me to treat it, I will. And if I succeed, what will you do? Kyle Lincoln boldly declared, ignoring Bianca White. If you can cure her, you can do whatever you want. A brat like you, still wet behind the ears, dares to act arrogant here, the male doctor sneered, his face full of disdain. Kyle Lincoln smirked coldly and strode forward. Kyle Lincoln. Bianca White hurriedly tried to pull him back, but the elderly man next to her held her back. Kyle Lincoln approached the patient's bed. Observing the young woman's pained expression, he extended his hands and firmly pressed on her wind pool, great hammer, heavenly pillar, and jade pillow acupuncture points. Ah! A cry of pain, louder than before, escaped the young woman's mouth. She curled up in agony, and the scene beneath her short skirt was fully exposed before Kyle Lincoln, revealing even a small pink fabric underneath. However, Kyle Lincoln remained entirely focused, not sparing a glance at the sight before him. His eyes were fixed intently on the changes in the young woman. I told you he couldn't do it. If anything happens to this girl, you won't get away with it today. The male doctor sneered, adding fuel to the fire from the sidelines. Kyle Lincoln ignored him, watching the girl's increasingly contorted face with a thoughtful expression in his eyes. Releasing his hands, Kyle Lincoln turned to the elderly man standing beside Bianca White and said, Sir, I can cure this young woman, but everyone must leave the room. What? You still want us to go out? What do you want to do? What's your relationship with this female student? Are you trying to harm her? The male doctor, upon hearing this, became displeased, took a big step forward toward Kyle Lincoln, and pointed at him while speaking loudly. Kyle Lincoln's eyes instantly flashed with a cold gleam. He turned his head to look at the male doctor, and a sharp glint suddenly shot out from his eyes, directly targeting the doctor. The male doctor felt as if he was being stared down by a ferocious beast. Fearfully, he shrank his neck back and lowered his head, not daring to meet Kyle Lincoln's gaze again. "Mr. Gold, he's the school doctor I mentioned to you. He's very skilled. Previously, when one of our guests suffered from food poisoning, he cured them in an instant. He's really amazing. Grandpa, please let him try." Bianca White held the old man's wrinkled hand, speaking in a sweet, coquettish tone. The old man glanced at Kyle Lincoln, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Young man, you claim you can cure her. I'm willing to let you try, but why do you want us to leave the room?" "Because this illness can't be treated while wearing clothes. With everyone here, it's inconvenient," Kyle Lincoln replied bluntly. "What? You're saying this student has a cervical spine condition, and yet it can't be treated with her clothes on? Young man, are you trying to take advantage of her illness to do something inappropriate? Let me tell you, if you dare, I will call the police right away." The male doctor immediately flared up, as if a small cat had its tail stepped on, jumping in agitation. Kyle Lincoln ignored the male doctor entirely, his eyes fixed on the old man. The old man looked at the young girl writhing in pain on the bed, then nodded and said, "All right, I'll trust you. We can't think of any other solution right now. If you truly can help, I'll let you try. There are cameras in the medical room, so you'd better not do anything improper. Otherwise, at your young age, your life could be ruined." "Don't worry, sir. I'm not like the pig standing next to me, charging at every cabbage he sees," Kyle Lincoln said with a nod. Chapter 21, Twisting Logic. "Let me tell you, it better be that way, or else, wait, who are you calling a pig?" The male doctor, initially ready to scold Kyle Lincoln smugly, suddenly realized and pointed at him, shouting loudly, "Get out. I need to treat the patient. If something happens, will you take responsibility?" Kyle Lincoln retorted disdainfully, glaring at the male doctor. The male doctor was momentarily speechless, trembling with rage as he pointed at Kyle Lincoln. In the end, he stormed out in frustration. Bianca White looked at Kyle Lincoln with hopeful eyes. Seeing him nod at her, she finally turned and left the room with the old man. In the now empty medical room, Kyle Lincoln turned toward the young girl lying on the bed. "I'm sorry, I just want to cure you," Kyle Lincoln muttered softly, reaching toward the collar of her shirt. The girl was wearing a blouse, and as Kyle Lincoln unbuttoned 3 buttons, a pair of ample curves came into view, covered by a white bra. They rose and fell with her labored breaths. Kyle Lincoln swallowed hard, unable to resist as he reached out his hands toward the sight before him. Kyle Lincoln truly struggled to control himself. More precisely, he couldn't restrain the 9 needles of the sun god technique within him. In the early stages of cultivating the 9 needles of the sun god, before reaching the foundation establishment stage, it was impossible to suppress one's desires. Faced with such an overwhelming scene, Kyle Lincoln felt an uncontrollable urge to cross the line and proceed directly to the main objective. Smack! A single drop of blood from his nose landed clearly on the bed sheet, and Kyle Lincoln's eyes widened in an instant. Again! Kyle Lincoln angrily shouted, quickly pinching his nose and grabbing a tissue from the table to stuff into his nostrils. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, Kyle Lincoln swiftly removed the schoolgirl's clothing and carefully propped her body upright. The act of removing clothing had no direct connection to treating cervical spondylosis. In reality, it was because Kyle Lincoln was employing the 9 needles of the sun god technique. This method contained an incredibly potent yang energy, and if the woman receiving this energy couldn't release it in time, it might accumulate within her body, potentially causing adverse effects. Kyle Lincoln took another deep breath and retrieved a pouch of silver needles from his pocket. Selecting the smallest needle, he began targeting acupuncture points like Heavenly Pool, Great Hammer, and others. Using precise needling techniques, he quickly and accurately inserted needles into points such as Heavenly Pool, Great Hammer, Wind Pool, Shoulder Well, Pool of Crookedness, and Arms 3 miles. Despite his speed, his needle insertions were shallow, and he slowly rotated each needle in his hands, channeling pure spiritual energy into the acupuncture points. Sweat dripped from Kyle Lincoln's forehead as he worked. His current cultivation level was too low to fully utilize the 9 needles of the Sun God technique. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to exert so much effort controlling multiple acupuncture points simultaneously. As time passed, Kyle Lincoln's complexion grew increasingly pale. Sweat covered his face, and his eyelids became heavy with exhaustion. The schoolgirl let out a soft groan, her brows furrowing. However, her previously pale face gradually regained a rosy glow. Without glancing at the girl, Kyle Lincoln began removing the needles one by one. He then used a needle-discharging technique, grasping the girl's delicate hand and targeting the backstream acupuncture point. Ah! The girl let out a sharp cry as the intense pain instinctively made her turn and wrap her arms around Kyle Lincoln's neck. Her ample chest pressed directly against Kyle Lincoln, sending a wave of comfort through his weakened body. Having just finished using the 9 needles of the Sun God technique, Kyle Lincoln was utterly drained. Being embraced like this left him with no strength to resist, and he collapsed onto the bed with the girl. "Brother Kyle, is something wrong?" A voice called out from the infirmary door. Bianca White hurriedly rushed inside, worried something had happened to Kyle Lincoln, only to be greeted by the compromising scene on the bed. "Brother Kyle, what are you doing?" Bianca White's expression darkened as she asked in a low voice. An elderly man entered the infirmary, followed by a group of doctors. "You scoundrel! I knew you were up to no good. If we hadn't come in earlier, who knows how far you would have gone. You've even stripped her clothes. Were you planning on going for her pants next?" A doctor who had always been at odds with Kyle Lincoln berated him as he stepped forward, grabbing Kyle Lincoln by the collar. Kyle Lincoln, now utterly exhausted, had no strength to resist. The male doctor hoisted him up effortlessly, beads of sweat as large as peas rolling down Kyle Lincoln's pale, waxy yellow face. "Today, I'm taking you to the police station. Scum like you must be punished by the law." The male doctor glared at Kyle Lincoln furiously. Kyle Lincoln let out a cold snort and said, "Who's the real despicable one here? I saved her, and now it's my fault. If you could treat her yourself, why would you need me? You." The male physician was momentarily speechless. The thing people fear most is having their flaws exposed, and Kyle Lincoln had done just that, with pinpoint accuracy. The male physician was so furious he was gasping for breath but eventually let go of Kyle Lincoln and turned to approach the female student. "Look at her, she hasn't even woken up yet, and you claim you've treated her. You're just making excuses. Let me tell you, you're not going anywhere. If you try to leave, I'll call the police." The male physician pointed at Kyle Lincoln, his face full of resentment. "And what if I've already cured her?" Kyle Lincoln leaned against the edge of the bed, grinning mischievously. The elderly man standing nearby observed Kyle Lincoln thoughtfully but didn't intervene. The male physician, enraged by Kyle Lincoln's provocation, blurted out without thinking, "Fine. If you've cured her, I'll kneel on the training ground and shout that I'm a pervert." Kyle Lincoln nodded and replied, "All right, but if you lose, you'll kneel and call me Grandpa." "Kyle, stop it. Don't cause a scene. You're all colleagues here, after all. Elder Alexander Gold just mentioned that he'll let you stay in the medical office," Bianca White said anxiously as she approached Kyle Lincoln, helping him up and whispering softly. "Arrogant and self-righteous people like him need to be taught a lesson, or he'll never understand his place." Kyle Lincoln snorted coldly, completely indifferent. "Ugh. Where am I?" Suddenly, a weak voice came from the bed. The female student, who had been unconscious, sat up, her face filled with confusion as she looked around the medical office. How is this possible? How can you be awake? The male physician's eyes widened in disbelief, cold sweat forming on his forehead. The entire medical office fell silent. Even the elderly man stood frozen in place, staring at Kyle Lincoln in astonishment. Kyle Lincoln, unfazed, turned and sat down on a chair. Having just used the 9 needles of the sun god technique, his spiritual energy was nearly depleted, leaving him utterly exhausted. This is impossible. Absolutely impossible. What did you do? How did she wake up? The male physician, unable to believe his eyes, turned and pointed at Kyle Lincoln, shouting angrily. A bet's a bet. Stop making excuses. If you don't want to pay up, just say so, Kyle Lincoln said disdainfully, looking at the male physician. This brat. Pretending to be weak only to reveal his strength at the last moment. Fine, fine. A bet's a bet. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Just you wait. The male physician was so furious that his face twisted. Initially, he had underestimated Kyle Lincoln, thinking he was just a lazy troublemaker. He had planned to humiliate him, but now he found himself in a trap of his own making. Ah! Where are my clothes? Suddenly, the female student let out a loud scream, quickly covering her pale body and turning to find her clothes to put on. The female student's friends, who had accompanied her, hurriedly explained the situation to her. Blushing, the female student raised her head to look at Kyle Lincoln. When her eyes met his handsome face, her cheeks turned an even deeper shade of red. Student, what exactly happened? Why did it suddenly become like this? The old man approached the female student and asked. I major in computer science. Because I've been using the computer for long periods to study, I developed cervical spondylosis. Yesterday, I studied all night with the air conditioner on, and today my neck felt very painful. When I tried to react, I felt a severe headache and then fainted, the female student tried to recall. Just thinking about the pain, she instinctively hugged her arms. Cervical spondylosis worsens when exposed to cold. This is indeed true. You must take care of your health from now on. Don't neglect your body for the sake of studying, the old man nodded and kindly advised. The female student shyly nodded and pointed at Kyle Lincoln, asking, Professor Alexander Gold, is he also a doctor in the medical office? Was it him who treated me just now? The old man was momentarily taken aback but quickly laughed heartily and nodded, saying, yes, he is indeed a doctor here. He just started today. It was him who treated you, but he's a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, so his treatment methods are a bit unconventional. For my sake, please don't be upset. Without prior permission, removing someone's clothing is certainly inappropriate. Professor Alexander Gold was naturally worried that the female student might report the incident to the school, which would cause trouble. The female student, her face flushed, stood up and walked toward Kyle Lincoln. I'm really sorry. I know a girl's chastity is very important, but Mr. Kyle truly didn't do anything inappropriate to you. Please don't be angry. I apologize to you, okay? Bianca White looked at the female student with a worried expression, speaking anxiously. The female student ignored Bianca White, staring directly at Kyle Lincoln, and asked, Doctor, what's your name? Kyle Lincoln smiled cheerfully, tossing his short hair, and said, My name is Kyle Lincoln. You can call me Mr. Kyle too. The female student nodded, shyly saying, Mr. Kyle, can you treat me again next time? I felt very comfortable. In an instant, the entire medical office fell silent. Everyone looked at the female student in disbelief, a large bead of sweat forming on their foreheads. No problem, no problem. I'm particularly good at undressing, especially for beautiful girls. Your cervical spondylosis has temporarily improved, but to completely cure it, you'll need to come back 3 more times. Got it? Kyle Lincoln laughed heartily, his eyes fixed on the girl's prominent features as he spoke. Yes, I understand, Brother Kyle. I'll be leaving now. The girl shyly replied, turning around to leave the medical room. What exactly did you do to that girl? Bianca White approached Kyle Lincoln with a displeased expression, loudly questioning him. I was just treating her illness. What's the matter? Didn't she just say so herself? Kyle Lincoln responded with a puzzled look at Bianca White. Bianca White coldly snorted, stretched out her slender leg, and stomped hard on Kyle Lincoln's foot. Kyle winced in pain, groaning on the ground as he looked at Bianca with a pained expression. Amused by Kyle's reaction, Bianca White laughed and playfully hit him on the chest. Chapter 22, In the medical room, you're so annoying. Alright then, now that you found a job, I'll be heading out. There's still a lot of work I need to help with at the shop. Bianca White said as she turned and walked out. Tell Uncle William that I'll prepare some wine for him tonight when I get back. Let him know not to worry. Kyle Lincoln called out loudly toward Bianca's departing figure, his eyes unconsciously drifting to her long legs and the fair skin revealed by her short skirt. Bianca White responded briefly and left the medical room. The room instantly became quiet. Although there were 5 or 6 doctors sitting around, no one spoke. Feeling slightly awkward, Kyle Lincoln turned and sat down on a chair. Young man, how exactly did you manage to treat that girl's condition just now? Suddenly, an elderly voice broke the silence, and an old man appeared in front of Kyle Lincoln. Aren't you a doctor? Don't you know acupuncture? Kyle Lincoln replied disdainfully, looking at the old man. The old man's expression shifted slightly, but he didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed and said, Of course, I know acupuncture. However, the girl's condition was quite severe. If one were to simply use basic acupuncture points like Heavenly Pool, Great Hammer, or Shoulder Well, it wouldn't have had such a quick effect. Kyle Lincoln thought to himself, so, he's here to learn. But what I know can't be learned by just anyone, even if they try to copy me. In fact, when treating cervical spondylosis, there's a very important acupuncture point, the backstream point.